Welcome to Unequal Dialogues, a podcast on all things civil-military relations. Our name, Unequal Dialogues, is borrowed from Eliot Cohen's work, Supreme Command, in which he describes the relationship between civilian political leaders and military generals. This relationship is a dialogue because it's an exchange between two parties, and it's unequal for both parties. Military generals have expertise in violence that civilian leaders lack, and civilian leaders have expertise in politics and are the ultimate decision makers, not the military. Our podcast is produced by the Civil Military Relations Network, and I am your host. My name is Manaswini Ramkumar. I go by Manu, or M, like Dame Judi Dench from James Bond. It's a reference that honestly doesn't land with students I teach these days. I got my PhD in IR from American University, and I researched the dismal topic of democratic erosion and institutional resilience, particularly the military. For our inaugural podcast today, we have with us Professor Steve Saideman. He holds the Patterson Chair in International Affairs at Carleton University's Norman Paterson School of International Affairs. He's published numerous books on the military, NATO, nationalism and war, and is also a co-author of the award-winning Stanford University Press book that came out last year called Overseen or Overlooked: Legislators, Armed Forces, and Democratic Accountability. Professor Saideman was also my postdoc supervisor and is the director of the Canadian Defence and Security Network and the newly launched Civil Military Relations Network, a non-partisan international research network bringing together academics, civil society actors, and government. Professor Saideman, welcome to Unequal Dialogues.
Manu, I'm very honored to be your first victim. Happy to be here.
First victim. Okay, thank you very much. So I want to talk to you today about the Civil Military Relations Network because I was involved with CDSN, and through this podcast, I'm getting to be involved with the CMRN. But I'm curious to find out how this came about. What is its relationship to the CDSN? So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, the CDSN, the Canadian Defence and Security Network, was aimed at building lots of bridges within Canada between the government, the military, the academic world, the private sector, to foster better understanding of each other, to help the academics provide some policy advice for the academics to get much insight into what the policy folks need and are thinking about. And so we had research, and we had a bunch of activities. And those things go on for 7 years. And in order to keep the gang going and the lights on, we developed a new idea because we couldn't do the same thing all over again. And the new idea is to do the same kind of thing at a broader scale, which is more international, but more focused, which is rather than all things defense and security, focus on civil military relations. So how do governments manage militaries and how do societies relate to their armed forces? And we didn't mean for it to be quite this timely. We thought it was going to be timely, but then it got even more timely with the crisis that South Korea had in the winter of 2024, with the onset of the Trump administration, and with, for instance, in Canada, the increased spending on the military as being sort of the show in the Carney government, the biggest priority. So the question will be is, what are we spending money on? Is it being well spent? What is the military doing with its money? And so that ultimately comes down to what are the civilians telling the military what to do, and whether the military is doing what they're told to do it. The relationship, as we can get into, is often fraught. And so we will understand that basic relationship. That there's been work in this field for decades and decades, but we're dealing with a variety of problems now that are stronger and more intense than before, such as efforts by some actors to politicize the militaries of the world. And so that's one of our major focuses is to try to understand how's that going and how to buttress militaries so they do not become politicized.
Yeah. You alluded to this in your answer before, the focus on civil relations now. So why now instead of, other hot topics like AI and national security, which is becoming a big thing?
Well, first of all, in the original CDSN, we had two of our four research streams that touched on civil relations. One was called Civil Relations, and it did a fair amount of surveys to understand Canadian attitudes about civil military relations, about the military. And the other was military personnel, which is how do we staff a military? And so those were two of our more, all of our streams were successful. Those are the two that sort of tied to each other and spoke to this moment. We did not have a lot of researchers doing AI. I don't know who the AI researchers are. And so the way partnership grants work is, and networks work is you build on your existing networks to foster new ones. And so the people I knew that were doing the most interesting work, interesting to me, and luckily interesting to the grant agency, was on civil military relations. So there's lots and lots of things to study in the world. We can't study them all. I do think that at this moment in time, civil military relations is very much at the center of the either preservation or demise of democracy in a number of countries.
Thank you. I did visit the website civmil.org. So for our listeners, please visit civmil.org. That's the website for the Civil Military Relations Network. I'd see that you branched out into a lot of different themes and they all have different research leads. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I've already alluded to one of them, which is politicization of the military. And so that's asking questions of how are both the military and the civilians either trying to keep the military out of politics or trying to drag the military into politics. So, for instance, having Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump, have that conference last summer where they lectured at all the generals and admirals in the American military to tell them how to think about things is one example of that. And so that involves Risa Brooks from Marquette, Lindsay Cohen from the U.S. Naval War College, Natalie Samby from the Verve think tank, and Carrie Lee, who works for the German Marshall Fund of the United States, are all working together on a variety of projects to understand this relationship and how to, again, limit the politicization of the military, because we really don't want the military in politics. The second research team is military personnel. So how do you recruit a diverse force at this moment in time? How do you develop a total defense force or a whole of society effort to deal with the moment? And so that has Stephanie von Latke of Queens, Irina Goldenberg, who works for an element of the Canadian Defense Department called the Director General of Military Research Personnel Analysis and PR, Research and Analysis. And Joachim Berntsen, who is a professor out of Sweden, is that team. They were very successful at producing a number of works in the first generation. The third set of work is led by Phil Agassiz, my colleague at Carleton. And he is looking at command, which is how do you structure the authorities and responsibilities so that way the military does what's it's supposed to do. He already had a workshop in London at the beginning of July, and I was there at it to hear about historians, how they think about it versus political scientists. And it was a lot of fun to learn about ancient Romans thinking about authority and where it comes from. And then the fourth theme is trust in the military. So J.C. Boucher did some of this work in the first generation. He's now teaming with Carla Machine Martinez from the University of Buffalo to ask questions of how do you build and how do you destroy trust in the military. They will ultimately work with some of the research centers around the world to do surveys not only in Canada and the United States, but also in Europe and elsewhere. So those are the four major research foci.
So I heard about Canadian researchers, American researchers, and a Swedish connection. What are your other international collaborations here?
We have one of our partners is the Bundeswehr's Center for Military History and Social Sciences, which is at Potsdam outside of Berlin. We have the Verve think tank, which is in Australia, which is mostly focused on civil relations in Southeast Asia, with a specialty particularly in Indonesia. We have partners in Brazil and Chile, whose Spanish and Portuguese names I will not butcher on this podcast. We have some American partners, and we have a British partner as well, which we'll be talking about later on, which is King's College has a Center of Military Ethics that, as I said, we'll talk about later. We also have scholars in a number of institutions in a number of countries around the world that are not attached to any of those research centers. Yeah.
So it sounds like you have your hands full with institutional and research administration, but what about your exciting new research topics? And also, please don't forget to plug in your the link between baked goods and IR here?
So the good news is I've got excellent staff who are handling most of the heavy lifting of institutionalizing this stuff. But we have the research teams, then we have activities. So our activities include an institute under the old CDSN, which we're going to have one more summer institute that's focused on Canadian defense and security. If we keep getting money from the federal government, from the Department of National Defense, we'll keep on having a Canadian focused summer institute. If we don't,
Correct.
then our institute will change names. Well, we're going to have an institute every year from now on focused on civil relations. And so it's not going to have a season attached to it because we have partners in the Global South. So seasons can be very confusing.
Mhm.
And it'll be on civil military relations. And so one year it'll be in Germany, one year it'll be in Sweden, one year it'll be in Australia, one year it'll be in Brazil, one year it'll be in Chile. So we do that. We're going to continue to have the podcast, including this new podcast. We're going to have the cards that develop conversations about civil military ethics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We're going to do mentoring, so we're going to arrange sessions at a couple conferences every year to have groups of small groups of students, like 2 or 3 students, meet with, partner with senior scholars to talk about their research in a more focused, intimate conversations about their research. So rather than being on a panel with 4 other people and getting maybe 1 or 2 questions, there'll be just a handful of individuals around the table talking about research, and that'll be good networking. It'll be good professional development. And we got some other things on as well, but those are things that come to mind. Oh, and about guns and butter. That is a pure accident. That is not really related to the grant. But what I've been doing for the past year is I've been creating reels where I bake. That's the butter part. And I talk about international relations. That's the guns part. And it's actually gotten a fair amount of play on Instagram. So that's been fun. I've actually now had to build a spreadsheet to figure out what I've already made, what I've already talked about, because there's already been nearly 40 episodes, 3 to 4 minute, 5 minute episodes of this madness, because I don't want to repeat recipes and I don't want to repeat the same topics. So I have to now keep track of it. So now it's gotten pretty abundant.
Okay. And depending on what you talk about, are you making a baked good from that part of the world or that country? Or?
It's not been regional. It's been mostly thematic. So, for instance, when I talked about deception in international relations, I made cookies where you stuff caramel inside the cookie and people are surprised to have a caramel treat they weren't expecting. So sometimes it's thematic like that. Sometimes it's a stretch. Sometimes I'm just making something and I want to talk about international relations, and the relationship between the baked good and the international relations is probably elusive or tenuous at best.
Wow. Who knew international relations could also be mouth-watering? Thank you. So we're trying to introduce a new kind of a fun segment in the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, we're planning to ask our guests to answer a question of military ethics. So the Center for Military Ethics, which is located within King's College London, has come out with a school teaching resource where they have ethics questions on a card deck. These questions have been carefully developed by leading researchers and ethicists based on professional military ethics curriculum. And they're meant to prompt informal discussions and debates so that you can normalize discussions about ethical challenges that military personnel would confront during operations. And I have a question for you.
Well, before you ask the question, we talk
selected...
about, sorry, it's already up, but just before you go further, this deck of cards has been translated into at least 11 languages, including both British English and American English.
Wow. Okay.
And also the online version of it has been accessed tens of thousands of times. So this has been a widely used resource by professional military education facilities to foster conversations about military ethics. And it is our goal to work with the same people and come up with a different flavor of cards. They already have a medical military ethics card set. We are going to be part of their expansion pack, essentially, of developing 52 civil military ethics questions. And not only the questions themselves, but on the flip side of the cards, they have a QR code that allow a curious individual to find more resources, whether that's readings, talking heads on video, talking about this stuff. So this is one of the major elements of the CMRN's
Mhm.
next 7 years is to develop the questions and then develop the not answers but the context so that people can
Mhm.
explore these questions further.
Thank you. Thank you for that cool new resource. So I have a question for you,
Okay.
and I've not shared this with you before. This is the first time you're hearing this question. And the question is in British English.
Okay.
Since you wrote a book about NATO, it's a question about multinational force. So you are a part of a multinational force, and you believe that another nation is not pulling its weight, undermining the whole military operation. What should you do, and with whom should you take up the matter?
Wow, that's a fun question because I did with my friend Dave Arswell write a book exactly about this challenge of countries having rules written by, the rules of every operation are written by their home country. And we explain the sort, where these rules come from, but then they lead to people on the ground being, some officer saying to some other officer, sorry, I can't do that.
Mhm.
Um, Whether it's fight at night, fight in the snow, engage in offensive operations, leave one sector to go
Mhm.
to another sector. In Afghanistan, this was really problematic because some sectors were much more dangerous. And if you didn't engage in offensive operations, then the Taliban would gravitate to your sector because you were a safer place to,
Mhm.
to hang out. Um, what you should not do is yell and scream at your ally for being a coward,
Mhm.
for not being a good ally. That is the wrong approach. It's not going to get you what you want. And the thing is, in every alliance that has ever existed, countries have and members have the ability to opt out. Uh, and you need to have that ability to opt out because then countries will sign on to the larger mission knowing that it's not going to tie their hands for everything.
Mhm.
Um, and it can be annoying. The memoirs of Dwight Eisenhower are all about the difficulties of managing the British and the French and other allies as Ike was making plans to invade Europe. Um, so how's the best way to handle it? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is you should, in your planning, come up with scenarios about likely things you have to do and ask all of your allies to go back home and see how their home country feels about those scenarios. And that way you would then come back and everybody briefs each other. This is what Brigadier General Lacroix did when he was running the NATO effort in Kabul for the Canadian military. And that way everybody knew what everybody's rules were, mostly what everybody's rules were. So that way you don't end up asking countries to do what they can't do. That's step one. Step two is once you know what they can and cannot do, try to figure out reasonable ways to get countries to do as much as they can uh, by providing as much intelligence and planning ahead of time so they can go back and call home and get permission to do this extra thing. And then put them in places where they can do stuff. One of my examples from the book was that in the embargo of Serbia by sea, the way NATO did it was it put the ships out further. Every embargo, every time you have ships blockade someplace, there are several rings of ships. The ones further out, their major job is to detect and to communicate, but not to fire upon the incoming ship. You give them several chances before you shoot at them. And so those countries that can't shoot, you put them on the outer ring. Those that can shoot, you put them on the inner ring because they're the ones who are going to ultimately need to shoot. So it's about assessing what your allies can and can't do and then using them for what they can do. And understanding, and this is one problem that the militaries of NATO had at the time, is understanding this is just the cost of doing alliance business. This is just the way it works. You have to accept it. It kind of seems unfair, but you'd rather have the allies show up and fill some roles than be fighting by yourself.
Mhm. Okay. On that note, thank you very much for the answer. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. And to our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in to our inaugural episode. We will join you with our next episode with more exciting civil relations conversations. Oh, civil relations dialogues. Thank you.